Hi, everyone, for joining. We're going to be starting in a few minutes. We're going to allow some folks to come in, and probably about 3 minutes past the half hour, we'll get going. So welcome, and looking forward to a good show. There's always that part where we feel like caged animals just sitting and having people watch us. I'll just keep talking while we're waiting for folks coming in. I'm going to repeat this, but looking forward to your questions and discussion. Please do, if you have questions, put them into. You'll see here in the webinar interface, there's both a chat dialogue and also a Q&A. So please try and get the questions into the Q&A as we're able to keep our eyes on them and keep that stuff from the chat. So we have someone watching those, so please put them in there and we'll get to them as we can. Give it about 30 seconds more, then we'll get going. Okay, 3 minutes past, let's get going. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is John Kinsella. I'm the CTO and co-founder for Cysense. We're a Singapore-based startup with a security platform for small and medium-sized enterprises, which allows those guys to be able to not have to worry about having a security expertise on staff and a lot of things we're going to be talking about today, and being able to sort of get through some of their initial security issues and security challenges and just close their deals. And so that's sort of what we're about and what we're doing. So as part of that, we wanted to bring in some really great experts and have a conversation here for the next hour about, what does a young startup or even a medium-sized startup, what should they be thinking about from a security point of view? So some housekeeping. We've got a great list of people here from the audience. So it's just looking through our RSVPs earlier today. We've got some CEOs, CTOs, lawyers, marketers, software engineers, program managers, students, business analysts, security people. So there's a really wide, broad collection of folks out there. And I'm saying that both from, I'm expecting a good conversation in our Q&A as well as in our chat, and then also for our participants here to think about as we're answering some of these questions and we're thinking about things, right? We're not just, the last thing I want to do when I say to spot, I'm also a host for a podcast called Application Security Weekly. So one of the things I talk about is I like getting outside my little security bubble, right? I want to talk to everyone else besides security people. So I'm glad to see those folks here today. Additionally, we have people from all over the world. Lots of folks from Asia, obviously. Australia, India, Europe. I think I'm the only guy in America right now. I'm in Seattle. It's 1:30 in the morning. Crazy American, but happy to be doing this. So as we get going here, and we're about to start doing some intros of these guests, one last thing. So as I mentioned, love to have your Q&A. We do have one requirement due to some of our sponsors. I cannot take questions from the media. So for last time I looked at our RSVP list, I'm not expecting any of those, but please keep that in mind. It's nothing personal. It's just, public companies, sometimes if things are said, or if a question's asked from a certain type of person, they have to be very cagey in how they answer things. And we don't want people to put anyone in that position. So let's keep this interesting and fun and keep that in mind. So with that, what I want to do is sort of go through our 3 guests here today, do a quick round of introductions for each of you guys. Then we'll sort of get going. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. easy for me to say right now. Björn Lindford, welcome.
Thank you. So this is the point where I say something about myself, right?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. I'm an engineer by training. I started my very first company, actually first year of university, designing websites for people in Sweden, which at the time was extremely lucrative. So that took me comfortably throughout university. Now fast forward to more present days, I have been the last 10 years in the Southeast Asian and Singaporean, specifically startup ecosystem as a founder, a CTO, tried to build an application development platform with a guy from Microsoft, which failed miserably, unfortunately, but it was a great learning journey for me, at least. I hope for the CEO as well. After that, I set up a consultancy, which I have been running up until quite recently, where I basically focus on helping founders in the region with their technical strategy, where, of course, I touched on many topics for many interesting companies, including, of course, cybersecurity. And I think for me, this with risk of sounding corny, those might have been the most formative years of my life, because I really got to spread my wings and consult many different companies around many different topics. Now I'm here on the dark side in the venture capital world. So I'm one of the partners in Antler, Singapore, which means that I no longer get to build anything. I just get to talk about building things, just like what we're going to do here today. So that's me.
Excellent stuff. Thank you and welcome. And I can say that Bjorn actually does like to. I can feel the urge for him to get his hands dirty. He's one of our advisors at Cysense. We went through Antler, great program, and he will eagerly, frequently say, "Hey, can we hop on a call and just dig into some of the details?" So he's a VC, but he is one of the ones that actually knows the technical side of things. So once again, happy to have you here. Going to go next to Tobias. Let's hear a little about you, your background, and your story.
Yeah, thanks. It's, I think, not quite the alphabetical order, but I'm happy to take over.
Oh my God. Sorry.
So yeah, I'm Tobias or Tobias. I'm here in Singapore for around like 3 years now. I went through like different startups. I'm currently with Aspire. Before that, I was working for a global company in the OT sector. So more engineering, more OT rather than hardcore startup, everything in the cloud, everything SaaS, so more traditional. Where I'm coming from. So I'm also by training an engineer, and I pivot like some years ago into the cybersecurity area, but by training I'm like an electrical engineer. And I build a lot of like things with ESP32, if somebody knows that. A lot of like project for environmental censoring. So yeah, if you have any questions about this as well, always reach out. And yeah, looking forward to have a good chat with you guys.
Very cool. If I know that earlier, I'm always up for a little bit of hardware hacking, but thank you. I'm glad to have you here. And as was pointed out, I'm doing this out of alphabetical order, so my apologies. Last but not least on our panel, Bryce, Boland, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here, and thanks very much for inviting me. So I'm Bryce. I've trained as a computer scientist with a master's degree in computer science, and actually studied cryptography of all things. I've spent about the last 25 years of my life helping organizations all over the world with their building security capabilities and in the fight against cybercrime. And spent the last nearly 10 years here in Singapore, working with companies like FireEye, working with in the banking community, and more recently working with AWS. And it's really great fun at AWS. I get to help thousands of companies in their security journey. And so hopefully we'll be able to give some guidance to some of the founders and other people in their security journey today.
Excellent. Welcome. Glad to have you here. We are an Amazon customer. And it's interesting, right? If you think about, I'm sure most people who are listening here, they've heard about some of the things, the aspects of an Amazon interview, either from AWS or Amazon. And, you guys talk frequently about, this is one of the few places out there in the world where you get to work on some of these problems at scale. So it'll be really interesting to see how you guys answer, how you think about some of these questions. So that's our panelists, right? And we've got, if we said very, very sort of, at high overview, we've got a VC, I've got a head of security for a startup, and I've got a head of security for a large cloud provider. So I think with that, we're going to get a pretty interesting, dialogue going on our side, along with what we've got from our panelists. We're already getting some questions coming in, from our attendees, easy for me to say. But let's dig in. So what I'm going to do here is go through our guests in round robin. These questions are going to be open for any of you guys, as you know, we've discussed this before. And I'm really looking for, I might ask a specific question, but as we go through, if a thought pops into your head, feel free to interrupt or, hey, say to me, hey, John, let's bring up this other topic instead. I'd love to make this really lively and interesting. So Björn, I am going to start with you. And so the first question up is, how do you think about security in a startup from your point of view? And, you're going in with really early stage startups, but do you think about security with the average deal you're looking at, or our average startup you're helping, mentoring? Do you think of it more as a necessary evil in 2022, or is this something which is now becoming part of business?
Yeah, so I'm going to give the most engineering answer ever you can imagine to this question. It depends, right? I think if we look at consumer startups, I would think about it similar to how I think about most things in the VC world. It's ultimately a calculated risk, right? If you have few customers, it's early on. Who gives a fuck, to use bad language, right? Would be one attitude to there. Of course, as you scale, there's going to be a point where that risk is becoming less and less acceptable, when you can resource yourself to adequately compensate for that risk and not suffer too great of an opportunity cost in the features you can deliver or the business outcomes you can enable, et cetera, right? Then you have to start asking yourself, when is that point and when should we start compensating for this risk? On the other hand, if you're more of a B2B play, for instance, selling to enterprise, having appropriate cybersecurity measures in place might simply be a basic ticket to play, an enabler that allows you to sell to enterprise in the first place, right? And again, these observations are, of course, very market specific as well. A VC in India might think about it differently to VC in the US, for example. But yeah, I guess those are my few initial thoughts. But I would have to say this, though, as well. It's actually, out of the companies that I'm coaching, it's usually not that I wake up sweating in the middle of the night over some cybersecurity risk for these companies, generally speaking. There are, of course, exceptions. But your company would be one relatively obvious exception to that, right? Or another one I can think of is Blue Sheets, which is building basically basic infrastructure for accounting effectively. So like a bottom financial API layer that interfaces with any and all financial systems that a business would have. They're now of a relatively advanced size and, dealing with relatively sensitive data. So there are cases where I would prioritize it.
It's interesting. In a previous life, I worked with one of my customers was one of the large, at the time, probably still is large, but video conferencing services. And you think about what is the security and compliance for a business like that? It's just chat or something like this. And then you start thinking about it. And what I'm doing is I'm sort of relating back to, like you said, with Blue Sheets. Frequently with a startup, you don't always think of what is the compliance. What are you actually walking into? What type of data do you have involved? Who are your customers? It turned out this chat product was being used here in the US by the Food and Drug Administration. So that suddenly becomes a much more sensitive thing, right? If you're actually talking about drugs which haven't been released to the public yet, or food issues, things like that. They had all these sort of security compliance things they had to jump through. It was interesting to see. But yeah, so with that, I don't know, let me sort of pivot that over to Bryce. It's what, from your point of view, what do you sort of think about it? It is from, let's go as I guess you're dealing with, I know you're not looking at the small startups that are using your platform every day, but I'm sure they're on your mind. So from what you see, how does that, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think security is becoming vital to all businesses, but the reason is because data is becoming critical to all businesses. And so startups aren't immune to that, right? Startups are collecting data about their customers, they've got intellectual property, they've got information about maybe their investors, and there's that they need to protect that. And because they're new entrants to the market, they're in that stage where they're trying to earn their customers' trust, and they need that trust to survive. So having the basic foundational security capabilities is actually really important, I think, for all startups. But it doesn't mean that you need to be, investing in lots of experts and lots of products. What I think really works well for startups is to think about the benefits you can have from having basic foundational security as part of your cloud platform. And that includes things like being able to use having good guardrails in place that would help your developers and people who are building for you to develop quickly, to be able to go fast, but to do it within some guardrails that keep them safe and keep your operation in a safe space. And then I think the other thing to think about is, most founders don't start out thinking, hey, I'm just going to build this small thing and then later I'll deal with security. But they've actually got in their mind that they want this thing to grow and be successful. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is as you get more and more customers and more demand, you have less and less time to think about, well, how am I going to go back and fix all my tech debt around security? So if you do have if you're thinking about it from the beginning and making it just part of the culture of your organization, that's going to make it a lot easier going forward to continue to grow your security capabilities, both your people as well as your technology platform.
Cool. Yeah, it's as you're talking about that, you're making me think of one of the phrases that's been popular in some circles over the last year is secure by default. And not quite the same thing you're thinking of, but still that concept of being able to have something that it's not rocket science for someone to have to figure out just to secure in the first place. Am I putting words into your mouth by saying that? I don't think so. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think we want to make it as easy as possible for all the developers, right? And this is it's a challenge for anyone today to build something completely securely because there's so many threats you might want to be considering. Mm-hmm. But being able to operate where you've got a simple set of controls in place that protect maybe, data can't leave your account easily, or, you've got backups of your data, or you're collecting logs so that if there is an issue, you can go and investigate them because you've actually got logs and you're not just looking at a disaster site and can't work out what's happened. Yep. So I think those sorts of controls are really critical. And sometimes what we tend to see in terms of the events that startups struggle with, it's things like having not protected their cloud accounts from abuse. Maybe they haven't enabled multi-factor authentication. Someone's gotten a hold of the keys. They're able to access the account, and then they can destroy your data. They can hold it to ransom. They can just do account fraud and spin up lots and lots of instances and mine for cryptocurrency. And those sorts of events can be existential for a startup. They can drain you of funds so quickly that you really have very little time to react, and in that time, your business can be destroyed. So, getting basic fundamental things right from the start, I think, is worth the investment. The challenge has been sometimes it seems like it's really hard to find out what to do and to invest that time. So, and we can talk more about what we're doing at AWS to help companies to make that faster and easier.
Definitely. Yeah, great way to start. So Tobias, thinking about that, we're talking about, I think Bryce said something really interesting there. Anyone who is, when they're first building a startup or building a product, they're usually, I was grinning because I was thinking they're not thinking they're going to build a secure product, they want to build a product. But he was saying they're, another way of saying that is they're trying to grow a company. So, you're in a medium-sized startup now, you're head of security, you're the guy who's in the trenches with this every day. So going back to that original question, how do you think about this whole thing? I'm guessing security, since you're there and you're employed, it is a necessary evil. But where does your brain go from there on that, something like that?
I guess so. First of all, I think security is not an evil portion of the business. I would rather say it's a business enabler, and I think more and more companies, also C-level, understands that it's really like a necessary portion of the entire business. And it will really help you lowering costs, lowering the impact of incidents. And it also helps you that the business stays agile. So for example, what we have seen during COVID, a very prime example, right? Everybody needed suddenly to work remotely. and there needs to be a certain level of security implemented already at this point. If you have not had this, you were not able to pivot quickly to let your people work remotely. I think another aspect is a very important one nowadays, because security is like such a big topic, even like in sort of like the in the public. It gives customers confidence, and also it keeps customer retention, because nobody wants to work with a business or like wants to use a business or a service which is maybe not able to really secure your data. And I think overall, it really just helps what was mentioned before already. It helps to protect revenue. It protects to save your funds, because like nobody's really misusing it. And yeah, nowadays really everybody has sort of like PII IP of their customers. So this of course needs to be protected.
Great answer. So we're already getting some really great questions coming in, and as people see me looking off here to the side of my screen, I'm not watching the latest video. I'm watching the Q&A of what folks are coming in. So I'm going to go a little off our scripts, and start with sort of related to what we're just talking about. Someone asks, what are some of the benefits of having security early in a startup? And Tobias, I think you were just talking about that. If maybe you want to talk a little more about that from an early stage point of view, or we can sort of bounce that thought around.
Definitely. So I think what is important, if you start early with something, you do not need to do rework. So you have to have at least like sort of a vision, especially let's say you have an application which you offer to your customers. What Bryce mentioned, like at some point you're so big and you need to do so many things in like a very short time. And if you then start implementing security, it might be not too late. You always can change things, right? But you're maybe not able to fix it anymore. And if you need to fix it, it will take you a lot of resources, a lot of money. So you really have to have a vision at the beginning. And also, on the other hand, at some point, like some of your systems will become compromised. You will face any security issues, and then it's maybe already too late. So you maybe have like a huge incident, and then a lot of customer data get leaked. It becomes public. Your customers are leaving. You maybe even face any regulatory issues. So maybe you have to pay a fine because you fall under any like GDPR or PDPA topics. So you have to have a certain amount of security very early on. And I think as a startup nowadays, it's actually quite easy with the tools you get offered from AWS, other SaaS providers. So you really have to start using what you have, and you have a very good fundamental security.
Yeah. I saw some head notes both from both of you other two guys. So we'll go back to you, Bjorn. Excuse me. How does that how does that sort of we were talking about this earlier, that you start with a lot of what you're doing is with these early stage companies. Does that resonate with you? Does that sort of, are you seeing as much of that need? Has it changed over the last few years?
I mean, it certainly changed with the advent of modern privacy laws and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things in the market landscape that have changed recently that would make it more relevant now than a few years ago. And of course, the trend is also very clear. I mean, it's only going to become more and more critical and crucial for the average startup to have cybersecurity focus as part of their core, right? I mean, we're not quite there yet, I would say, in most markets, including Singapore, but it's definitely headed in that direction. And I was thinking about what you said, Tobias, and I completely agree with that as well. And I think another inherent benefit of focusing on it early on is to build that awareness and culture around the organization to think about cybersecurity in everything that you do, right? I mean, it shouldn't be an afterthought, basically. It's something you do, after a certain stage of the evolution. But if you can incorporate that thinking from the bottoms up, from the early days, then you are, of course, benefiting from that, right? So that's another aspect.
Excellent. And Bryce, my apologies. It was pointed out to me that you had your hand raised in the interface, and I didn't quite see it there. So. Where does this, what thoughts come out of your head related to that last question?
Yeah, look, I think you hit on some good points, right? And the way I tend to think of it is security is actually, it's a journey. It's a long and continuous journey. It doesn't have an end. And when you start that journey, you start by actually deciding who's accountable. And if you don't have someone in your organization who's accountable for security, then guess what? It doesn't take place, right? So I think for a lot of founders, a lot of CTOs, that accountability sits with you immediately, and then you've got a decision to make. Do you want to invest in this? Do you want to make it part of your organizational culture? And how do you want to address it? And I think that the easiest way to do this is just to iterate on it continuously. So you don't say, well, we're going to be, hitting all the compliance benchmarks and all of the security, things have to be perfect. You start with, what can I do today that's going to improve security? And how can I, as I grow, empower and give ownership of security to my developers, to my salespeople, to the rest of the team, so that they can kind of be part of that iteration and constantly be improving how you build things, just as you would with the rest of your product. You want your product to continue to grow and improve. You want to be iterative. You want to be able to move fast, and you want to you're going to make mistakes occasionally, but you want to be able to change and adapt rapidly. So taking that kind of mindset that it's a journey, trying to make your organization more capable every day, and that starts really by having someone accountable for it and ensuring that mindset becomes part of the organizational culture.
Yeah, definitely. It's with my engineering hat on, I'm much, and probably my consulting hat too from the background. I always think of these type of things in like a multi-phase approach, right? I'm not looking for perfection initially. I'm trying to get some sort of MVP out there that people can use, and then iterate through, as you said, or go through multiple phases and improve. And it's funny, what I really love about conversations like this is we just really segued into what was going to be our next question, is talking about, when does a startup start thinking about security? Do it early stage, or do you wait for a vendor to, as I wrote down our questions that we have internally, do you wait for a vendor to ask you about a penetration test? I don't know if you want to keep going to what you're just saying, or you want to sort of rest on your laurels, to think you're just talking about the same sort of thing.
Well, look, I think you start as soon as you can, but that iteration means that you're going to continue to grow and get better, and obviously grow your culture. I think it's very easy to get caught up in this sort of idea that I need lots of tools. And that actually is probably not what most startups need. They probably need to have more of the culture and the accountability, and be thinking about the customer experience. The customer experience of their product might be wonderful, but it's a pretty bad day if all their data gets published to the internet, or someone is, compromising their data as a result. So you want to kind of inculcate that idea of iterate, improve security as part of how you think about what it is you're building, and don't get too caught up in, I must have the latest buzzword tool, because that may or may not be actually what you need right now. Maybe more focus on keep getting better every day, and then you will choose a path that makes sense for your organization.
I think there's a, I don't know if it's how you categorize it psychologically, or if it's gender-based or not, but there's at least to a group of us out there, there's, ooh, shiny tool, I must get it, even though it doesn't specifically do what I want. It looks amazing, it's going to do all these great things for me, but is it actually helping my bottom line? Is it making business more secure? Björn, I don't know if you want to keep running with that. It's, as those companies go through those stages, does the spend become more sophisticated? Does how they look at security become more sophisticated? How do they keep going and growing down that path?
Yeah, that's a good question. You mean as they evolve through cybersecurity adoption in different shapes and forms, what they do, at what point?
I'm keeping running with that question we had there originally of, when do they, we're sort of talking through, they probably want to start earlier rather than later on that security journey. And then they're going to go through multiple phases of improving that or growing through that. And then, so is that just purely a refinement? Whether it's, and it's funny, Tobias earlier was talking about OT and completely different areas of security. and me with my hat on nowadays, I think about security, it's either application security or cloud security, maybe infra. But so the question to you, I'd say, is thinking through that sort of that space, do they keep refining maybe as they head towards, say, like an A round, let's use that as a goalpost, or do they start thinking about when they put something onto the budget?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually haven't really observed that, but I would imagine that at least if you successfully manage to build in cybersecurity thinking into the fabric of your culture, or better yet, you have dedicated resourcing that dedicate themselves to thinking about cybersecurity, I would imagine that it would be a continuous effort that that organization goes through, which of course would start with broad strokes to solve the most obvious glaring issues, and then gets more and more refined over time, right? But I would also say that your cybersecurity posture, how you think about it, will probably take different shapes and forms also depending on the type of company that it is, right? You can think about some of our companies in the crypto world, for example, right, that have an end user facing portion. For them, things like very early on having two-factor authentication becomes super important, for example, or having certain security measures that are public facing. Then how well the underlying security of that company has been structured, as say around API endpoints and cloud infra and everything else, I think could unfortunately be less prioritized in those cases, right? So it's also to a degree a perception play is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, makes sense. So the questions from the audience are actually coming in quicker and we can answer them, which is pretty amazing. And I'd love to see that. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Tobias, but I've got a question here which I think you can give us some really interesting input on. This came up a few minutes ago from Maurizio. Many startups use freelance developers, particularly in earlier stages. Are there special considerations and suggestions for maintaining a high level of security whilst having non-employees working on your code? Is that something you've run into, or do you have any thoughts around?
Definitely. So I think, yeah, the most of the startups do this. Also, just because of skill shortage, you have to source freelancers, you have to source globally. Yeah, the issue is really like, how can you trust? So how can you trust somebody who sits like in a completely different country? But I think very often it's just like perception. So I think we maybe think like somebody who's not sitting next to us, we cannot trust this person. But what needs to be in place are just really like need to know principles. So you only give what this person needs for the work and of course for the overall understanding. But I don't believe that, for example, every developer needs total read and write access to your production database or to like all the different repositories. On the other hand, I think there needs to be also some sort of like environment in place that where the developer is working in is first of all protected by all sorts of things like security controls, malware protection, and also in an environment where it's very hard or maybe even impossible to exfiltrate, first of all, data, and maybe also all sorts of other company IP. So you can do it with like a virtual machine, you can hand out laptops where you have more control over what a freelancer developers might be doing.
Yeah. And so this is something that the first time I was doing a startup where I had folks outside the US, they were in Kazakhstan when I was in Silicon Valley. We were thinking a lot about this, and this question's come towards you, Bryce. And it's sort of what you're just talking about, Tobias, of, you know, I want a laptop, I want to lock down, I want to, you know, this code is my baby. I don't want anyone else to be able to access it, you know, VPNs. How can I make this as secure as possible? And this was a bit over 10 years ago, call 15. At that point in time, a product didn't exist at Amazon, which exists now at AWS, which is, if I remember right, Cloud9. Your ability to do virtualized IDEs. So I guess, you know, it's, I'm partially throwing you a softball, but partially sort of thinking about, it seems like for this particular question, that sort of could be potentially be a great tool to allow someone to, you know, you don't have to worry about the security of the laptop as much, right? You can have like a Chromebook or something like lightweight, you don't have to have a big heavy development station. Do you see people using it that way, or is that something you would recommend, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, great question, right? And as much as it may seem like a softball, I think the answer, as usual, to security questions is it depends, right, on what your organization is and what you're trying to do. But I mean, absolutely. I think one of the big things that's changed over the last, say, 10 years has been effectively the shared responsibility model, right? And the shared responsibility model we have for cloud providers basically says there's a range of things that the cloud provider or the SaaS service or whoever you're contracting to provide your capability, that they'll take care of a lot of things for you. And then there are services that you can then use that you don't have to take care of a lot of the security requirements that you would have had to deal with before. So a lot of the physical security, patching infrastructure, maintaining the availability and the resilience of the things that you need. But then on top of that, there's a whole range of things that are available as SaaS offerings, essentially. Services that, like you mentioned, Cloud9, a developer environment that can be tightly controlled, but give developers the freedom to actually build and get their jobs done. Or the range of storage of options that you have for managing data and keeping it safe, and being able to resiliently recover in the event that some kind of disaster happens. Maybe you gave someone too much access, but then you can still recover whatever they've damaged. So I think that shared responsibility model has probably helped more than anything else to raise the bar on what's sort of there by default. And it's probably shrunk in some ways what security teams and CTOs need to worry about. That said, the threat environment has certainly evolved as well. And so nothing stood still. And now we've got new kinds of threats. We've got ransomware as a big challenge now for most organizations. And it's certainly the case for startups as well. Startups can be ransomed just as easily as a big enterprise, and often easier because they might have less controls in place. So it certainly, it is easier in some ways. And I think the adoption of CI/CD and the approach of developers using automation to build probably makes things a lot easier for the security organization, because you can build into the pipeline different controls, different checks that are relatively unintrusive for the developer. So they can still get their code built, they can still test things, but you have the ability to know, hey, they're putting in malicious code, or they're putting in vulnerable libraries, or they're encoding the keys to use an API, and you can detect that before it goes into production and causes you a real problem. So I think overall, it's been improving steadily for giving founders and CTOs the ability to have better controls over all of their developers.
The amount of things we have to juggle are it's even for a small startup. It's one of the things one of my co-founders, Chad, and I were talking about before this is, what is that difference between how an enterprise thinks about security, like, big E enterprise with all sorts of boxes and things that they manage both on-prem and hopefully in the cloud, versus the young, hip, nimble little startup, because, we're nimble and light. We don't have that much stuff, right? And you start thinking about how that very quickly sort of explodes out. And this is sort of setting up to another question from a listener. So I don't know, I'll throw this out to you to see who responds first, either Björn or Tobias. What are the biggest and most common security risks for a startup? And also, what is the most uncommon security risks? So I think of that, like I said, sort of comparing from an enterprise point of view, where both sides are going to have some worry about ransomware. But if you're a large enterprise with, gigabytes, if not terabytes of data, if not petabytes, that's a much bigger concern, I think, at least in some ways, the cost of the data, versus in a small startup, there might be ransomware, it might only be a few hundred megs, but still, if that's encrypted, that's the business. So I don't know, I talked about those two. There's different sides of that coin, but how do you protect? What's the sort of the things you focus more on that you might not focus on if it was an enterprise?
I'm happy to take it. So I think I would like always look into, okay, what is first of all most likely and what will have the biggest impact. And in my experience, it's usually just in general malware, web-based attacks, and denial of service. I think this is really what startups have to fear. And I think in the recent maybe 1-2 years, ransomware, what was mentioned, is really up and coming again. Huge threat, especially if you do not have backups, if you're very early on, you haven't thought about these things. Like very quickly, everything you had is totally wiped out. What is sort of like maybe not so possible or not so often happening, I would say nowadays, maybe physical attacks, because especially startups running in the cloud very often, everything they have is sometimes just software as a service. If you use like one of the big cloud providers, they are taking care of this portion. They are taking care about the physical security of your infrastructure. Physical security in terms of maybe your enterprise IT, for example, your user laptops, you still have this responsibility to take care of this, but this is very easy to protect against just by encryption. I think this would be my take on that.
Anything to add, Björn?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts immediately gravitate towards what is it called? Is it the types of emails that where you impersonate someone else, usually the CEO of the company that writes, phishing email.
Really?
Extremely common across all organizations, it seems. I mean, we're exposed to this quite a bit in Antler, and it's amazingly fun, by the way, to reply to these emails. I don't know if anyone else except me actually has a habit of doing that, but it's super fun to reply and just see where the conversation goes. Other than that, there's of course the human element in the equation, right? If you have a bunch of employees in startups, they would usually have, for instance, their own laptops that they work on. There's of course a big risk that these employees eventually walk out the door with some of your IP and some of your intellectual properties. That's, I guess, one area where I see startups being especially sloppy that always have somehow bothered me a little bit. So all the startups that are listening to this, please do better there. I'm not sure if Cloud9 or equivalent remote controlled IDE is the right option, though. I don't know if anyone in this group has actually used those. So this has been a while ago now, but at least last time ago I used one of those. It was a completely miserable experience, right? Your keyboard shortcuts don't work. There's a bit of delay in input, etc. But that was a full-fledged remote desktop that we were forced to log into and use some type of Linux system through, right? On a Mac, by the way.
Yeah, we actually, at least one of my developers is using Cloud9 on a probably close to daily basis, depending on the workload he's working on. So he seems pretty happy with it. He spins it up and down as he needs to. He's doing data science in it. So it seems, I haven't done it myself, but he seemed quite happy with it. So I know what you're talking about, and yeah, things have changed significantly. I'm happy to say
things have changed. Yeah. This was probably 12 or 13 years ago or something like that. So.
The big thing that's changed there is the availability and the speed, right? So performance is improved, latency is decreased. We've all got faster machines, we've got faster internet connections, and we're closer to where the hosted environments are in most cases because, name the cloud provider, they've probably opened a region nearby in the last few years. So all of those factors contribute towards an improved user experience. And I think that's actually, that's great for security outcomes, right? It means that we can provide more controlled environments that give you access to still be productive and highly effective. And in many cases, because those systems are directly integrated into other cloud services, you can, very easily be extremely productive and integrate with your build and deployment processes without a lot of additional work. So that not only makes you more secure, it actually makes you faster. And that obviously from a speed perspective, Björn, I'm sure you would agree, the faster you can build, the lower your cost is going to be before you can get your, minimum lovable product out the door to customers.
Yeah. It's funny, for some reason that makes me think of ISC, infrastructure as code. It's previous life for a short period while I was working in an ISC security company. I've used most of these tools in the past. We're using CDK now from Amazon. Really, this is not an Amazon ad, but no matter which one of those tools out there that you use, using something like that where you're able to reproduce, to me, again, with the engineering lead on, if I can reproduce things in case, I don't know, I do something stupid and I blow everything up, or something happens on the West Coast of the US, knock on wood, or whatever it is, if I can take that IAC and turn around and point it at Southeast Asia or Europe or something else, maybe I want another DR zone, that power is it allows me to sleep better at night, and also allows me to, as you were just saying, be able to reproduce that thing quicker. So, you think about security from that CIA triad point of view, and availability is a big deal. And we've had some folks asking about availability. Tobias, is interesting to hear you talk about DOS. Hadn't thought about that for a while, but it is still a thing. But sort of combining some of the questions we're getting from listeners with something we talked about before, I'm going to go back to sort of theoretical question. It's for you. You joined a young startup as a CTO. There's 10 developers, no security expert. Company uses cloud providers, consumes some cloud services. They've got a distributed workforce. What are 2 or 3 things you would do that allow you to sleep better at night from a security point of view?
That question is
for you,
for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I mentioned this before. You really need to start using what you actually have. Again, like when you use like cloud providers, SaaS services, or SaaS, there's so many great things already out of the box, which people are just not using. I think like one big topic is IAM, least privilege, 2FA, strong passwords, roles for resources, don't use credentials within the service. These sorts of things help you already so much, and these are like all built in. You just need to use them. But very often you see people are not doing it. Other things which help you like a lot is just minimizing your attack surface by patching, just closing down services. I sort of have the methodology. I say like what does not need to be public, what is not for the customer does not need to be public. So for example, your development, your staging environment, don't expose it to everyone, just expose it to your developers. And another thing, if I have to stick with 2 to 3 things, education was also mentioned before. I think everything we do, if attackers are coming in, if you write vulnerable code, everything is done by human. So you need to really do your trainings, your education, your awareness, and there's also really great free material, free tools to do this. And yeah, these are really like, I think 3 things you can do, which cost you usually nothing and helps your security like a lot.
Excellent. Bryce, I'm curious in your thoughts on that. When that time comes when you decide to move on and go do a startup and be that CTO at the 15-person company, what would be sort of things that are on your mind?
Well, I advise a number of startups in that capacity, right, as a security leader and as an investor as well.
Come on, jump over the fence. Come over here full time.
It's but the reality is, I think a lot of firms that they think, well, security, it's so daunting, right? How am I going to detect this? I have to have a security expert on my team, and actually, you really don't. Not when you're starting, right? When you're really just getting started out, you're much better off to use the tools that are available, that are easily available, and in many cases free if you're building on a cloud platform. So in the case of AWS, for example, there are solutions like Trusted Advisor that tell you, if you are building things that are way outside of best practice. So they'll tell you if you haven't got multi-factor authentication on. They'll tell you if you've got public-facing S3 buckets and things like this. Just go and use those. Right? Get started on that journey and learn as you go. The next thing I'll tell you is most of the problems that we see that customers have, they start with one of a handful of things. The first one is identity. If you don't have multi-factor authentication on your root account and for your developers who are logging in, then you're likely to have, much more likely to have a problem. And so please, go turn that on. The other thing is go and check that you don't have users in there that have left the company, that you've actually disabled their access. I've seen cases where startups have basically been held hostage because they had an argument with the developer and the developers left, but they've still got the keys to the kingdom. So you definitely want to avoid that.
Yeah. It's in real quick on that one. Those two things sort of tie together, though. Also, it's unfortunately, with the startup hat on, one thing we're both great at and horrible at is kicking cans down the road. So like, we'll deal with that next week. But getting some sort of centralized auth in place, auth Z, auth, I'll say it in your guys' language, auth Z and auth N, really helps. I mean, if you have that, then when you come to that point of saying, who is still in the company, you've got one place to make that check, not going out to your code repositories versus your CI systems versus, your cloud provider versus all these other things. So yeah, I think that's a hugely great point. Björn,
yeah, and look, I think the identity one is like it's the key one. Like every organization has identity challenges, right? Until they implement a proper identity platform, they have single sign-on, they've integrated all their services to use it, they've got multi-factor authentication on it, but you don't get there from day one, right? So it's a journey, and so my point is, think about who are the people that have access. How do you know that the person who's logging in is who you think they are? What's the proof? Multi-factor will help with that, and it addresses the phishing, the business email compromise. It can really address a lot of those threats very, very cheaply and without a lot of friction for a startup. The other thing that we see a huge amount of challenges with is just misconfiguration. It's making things public that shouldn't be, or it's setting things up so that data can move from one account to another account when it's supposed to stay in one place. And again, there are very simple tools that are available that give you those best practices and tell you if there's a problem, and can enforce best practices for you very easily. So tools like Config, tools like Trusted Advisor, and they can give you very easy visibility, which is something that wasn't easy in the traditional on-premise world, because there wasn't the infrastructure to instrument things, and you get that by default in the cloud. So just go turn those things on, go use them. They're very easy, and they will save you a lot of time dealing with configuration issues, because they'll come up very quickly and allow you to spot them. And then you can learn, why did that happen, and start to build that culture and knowledge within your startup.
Yeah, I think my sense is with the four of us here today, where we've drank the Kool-Aid on the cloud, so we don't have to at least convince ourselves of is cloud going to be more secure than on-prem. But sort of thinking of that as and I say that as a good thing, right? There's so many, all these tools which have matured and come up and allow us to build trust, right? Because that's really what security is about to a large portion. We're under 10 minutes. And I want to finish with a question which on the surfaces, it sounds sort of almost like, can I pick a tool? But I think it's the sort of the subtops underneath it. So I'm curious to see where this one goes in remaining minutes. And I'll go back to you with Bryce initially. What trends in InfoSec should a startup CTO be paying attention to? So, you're just talking about IAM, which what made me think of this. So should they be thinking about zero trust? Maybe should they be thinking about securing the supply chain? That's one of the big sexy things for last year. DevSecOps, is there some other sort of security trend out there, or should they be looking at those trends?
Well, look, these trends exist for a reason, right? And it's because they're addressing some of the critical challenges that organizations face. But I tend to advise people not to chase the trends, right? It's usually better to think about what do you actually need to achieve, and then think, okay, well, what's going to help me get there, quickly, effectively, and so on. So, if I think about what zero trust actually is, when you break it down, it's primarily about, it's having good identity management practices. Mm-hmm. And it's about building your infrastructure and your services so that they can be accessed over an insecure medium like the internet. And if you can do those two things, then you can you can effectively achieve what Zero Trust sets out to achieve. But those two things are actually what you need to go after, right? Identity and managing that securely, and building things that are configured well, that are tested well, that are robust against threats. And then you join those two together, so you can know who's got access to what, and that when they've got access to it, that's all they can do is access those things. They can't tamper with them and manipulate them in unexpected ways. Mm-hmm. So again, supply chain risk, it might apply for some organizations more than others. I think it becomes more of a concern if you are trying to supply large organizations that are demanding that on you. So again, it will depend on where you're fitting. If you're a B2B, it's probably more important than if you're a B2C. And DevSecOps, well, this is just about making sure you've got this culture of thinking about security as you develop, and ideally putting as much of the work and effort into the development pipeline so that it's going to be automated. You can't expect developers to be amazing at everything, including security. So take as much of that off their plate as you can, and build things into the automation, and make security just part of the thought process. Part of the burn down that they've got to address is the security threats, the security risks, making sure that they're addressing configuration issues and things that are identified by the automated tooling. And then as you get more mature, maybe you invest in specific products. Maybe you're going for a compliance goal, or you need to get compliance for a particular customer. Maybe that's the point where you go, okay, I need a specific tool that's going to give me that compliance view, or I need to bring in a partner that's got that expertise. So again, it's a journey, and don't try to solve it all at once. Just keep iterating and keep getting better.
That makes sense. And I agree with you on I think one of the big takeaways, or one of the big things I believe in, is that concept of security in general should be about, but specifically DevSecOps is really sort of the culture which you build around it, and how do you talk about security within your company, and how do you deal with it? Tobias, same question to you. Do you look at that from the same sort of, just thinking about that overall, do you recommend, I don't want to say chasing, but focusing on those big sort of the topics of the day, or is it more sort of head down and just get things going for you?
Maybe let me answer it from some trends I'm seeing. So I think one trend is definitely what also has a huge impact onto security, what we talked about a little bit previously. So remote working, skill shortage. I think skill shortage is actually a huge thing, especially in the security sector. So if you nowadays search someone for your team in the security or even IT area, you will have a very, very hard time to find people who actually have the skills and expertise you're searching for, especially in the cloud environment. Because I assume because of COVID, all the good people just got scraped off from the market, and everybody needs more IT, more security. So one trend is definitely going more into hiring of freelancers, but then ensuring that these freelancers can work in a way with your IP, with your environment in a safe manner. Other topics, I think, which are from security perspective, very alarming. Just incidents increase in volume, attacks increase, the number of breaches increase. So I think this is very worrisome. And if I hear sometimes some C-levels, they say oh, this will not happen to us. It will, at some point it will. So definitely you need to have a dedicated resource in your company to really think about security, to deal with security. Things which are also more and more common, I have seen social engineering. LinkedIn is very special for this. There's a lot of things happening where people pretend they're working for your company and they want to get some insights, or they ask you, can you sell me some data directly? I pay a very high price. very surprising. And I guess just to round it up, overall, data privacy becomes bigger, cloud security becomes a bigger topic just because of the move of the data privacy portion because of more and more breaches. So the regulatory body really comes in and says like, now you have to, like implement certain things to protect people's privacy.
Yeah, there's so much to cover. We go on for hours and hours. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to wrap it up with that. What I want to do is go around through you guys real quick. If folks want to talk to you more, what's the best way to get in contact or anything coming up where you guys could be speaking? I'll start with you, Björn.
Sure. I mean, best way to get in touch with me might be on LinkedIn. I don't use Instagram. I don't use Facebook or a lot of other social media. So you won't usually find me online a lot. Another good way to get in touch with me is, of course, to apply for our upcoming Antler program, where we fund entrepreneurs just like yourself and give them capital right at the beginning of their journey so they can go out and realize their dreams. You can find out more about Antler on our website, which is antler.co, if you're interested in that. If you just want to send me a random message and hang out or discuss cybersecurity or nerdy things, please do. LinkedIn would be the way.
Excellent. Thanks, sir. Bryce, best way to either contact you or follow up with Amazon or anything you want to talk about there?
Well, if any of your cybersecurity folks out there want to learn about cybersecurity, we've got the AWS Summit coming up on May the 17th. Please sign up for that. You can learn lots about how to build securely and safely on Amazon. And if you're thinking about getting a bit more in depth into it, we have security clinics and security workshops where we can help you as well. And otherwise, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Always keen to hear what founders are up to and see what security problems you're facing and see if we can find a way to help you over them.
Excellent. Appreciate you being here. And Tobias, again, last word.
So same thing, LinkedIn is the first point of contact. Reach out, send me a message so I know who you are. Just connect with me if you want to have a coffee, talking about cybersecurity, electronics, anything. And if you're like in Singapore, of course, let me know. Always happy to meet up. If you're like a small business or a startup and you need a bank account, you need to improve overall your how you deal with your finances, your invoices, check out our website, aspire-app.com. We're happy, to help you, to explain you what we do, and of course to onboard you. Yeah, reach out and let me know how I can help you.
Thank you for joining us. I have to say, parting thought on that, I got my Flipper Zero hardware hacking device on a Friday, so we'll have to nerd out about those things later. I'm always happy to talk about them. So last thought from Cysense. Again, thanks everyone for coming. Like I said, we've got a ton of questions. We still have 5 or 6 from the audience, plus everything we want to go through. So these will be turned into a series of blog posts. We will be doing more webinars in the futures. You're able to contact me on Twitter, John L. Kinsella, or easier to spell would be Common Cysense for the Cysense Twitter account. And then also cysense.io. So appreciate everyone for their time. Thanks for coming. And we'll look forward to talking with you soon. Take care.
Bye. Thanks for hosting, John.
Bye, everyone. Thanks very much.
Take care.